The Retirement Cafe Podcast, Episode 5, The Big D, Why Dementia is Not a Death Sentence, with Dr. Ben Hicks.
Retired or thinking about retirement? You've come to the right place. Welcome to the Retirement Cafe Podcast. In each episode, we bring you an important conversation with insight, tips and knowledge, all designed to help you live a fulfilling and successful life in retirement. Here's your host, Chartered Financial Planner and Accredited Later Life Advisor, Justin King.
Dr. Ben Hicks is a psychology lecturer at Bournemouth University and the Deputy Director of the Aging and Dementia Research Centre. It's quite a mouthful. Ben's interest in dementia was triggered by his own grandmother's diagnosis when he was in his early 20s. And at that time, Ben had no idea how to interact with someone with dementia. And was so gradually, he stopped communicating with his gran, and his perception of dementia was that it was an absolute death sentence. So, this is a really interesting conversation that I had, and Ben now believes that dementia is no longer a death sentence, and his work is about helping change perceptions and remove the stigma associated with dementia. He's had some groundbreaking research into showing how the latest technology can be used to help dementia sufferers live well with the disease for many years. His research suggests that around 1/3 of dementia cases are preventable or related to lifestyle factors. So what can you do to try and avoid being diagnosed with dementia? Or if you are, how can you cope with it? This was a thoroughly interesting conversation. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Dr. Ben Hicks. So welcome once again to the Retirement Cafe Podcast. I'm Justin King, Chartered Financial Planner and Chartered Wealth Manager at MFP Wealth Management. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Dr. Ben Hicks here at Bournemouth University. Now, I know Ben quite well. He's come to a couple of our live retirement cafes, and he is a dementia expert. So over to you, Ben. Could you just introduce what you do, who you are, and how you've got here?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, I'm Ben. I'm a psychology lecturer at Bournemouth University. I'm also the Deputy Director of the Aging and Dementia Research Centre. So it's a fairly new centre that's been set up in its initial form, it was called Bournemouth University Dementia Institute Buddy. We've now name changed to ADRC. And the idea is that it's this cross-faculty centre that academics from a range of disciplines such as media, tourism, technology, history, architecture, come together with the sole aim of improving the lives of people with dementia and those supporting people with dementia and practitioners working in the field within their different areas. So maybe that's looking at the way looking at the way dementia is portrayed and how we can portray it more positively or promote more positive messages through media and film. Technology, with the advancement of technology, it's around how technology can be used to support people to live better or to manage the condition better. So we were able to draw on a range of disciplines and expertise across the university to support people with dementia. I mean, at the very core, we are led by those with dementia. So we have an advisory group of older people and people with dementia, and we regularly communicate and engage with them and ask them what are the most pressing issues that they have. And then this gives us an idea of the areas that we can expand our research into. So we're very much led from the ground up. We don't want to come in as in our ivory towers as academics and say, this is probably what you need to do, or this is probably the area of research you need to go in. We like to be grounded within the views of people with dementia. And because then if they can suggest certain areas, we can then bring in the expertise from across the university, from across the different faculties to try and address those questions.
So how did you get involved in this work?
Yeah, so as two kind of main reasons, I suppose. So one was quite personal in that my gran developed vascular dementia, probably when I was around 2021, and I did not understand it. I was very much, I think, in the position of quite a lot of other people now, and I had no idea what it was. I was scared of it, had no idea how to interact with somebody with dementia. And as a result of that, I suppose, kind of unconsciously isolating my gran. Like, I realised she was struggling to communicate, so wouldn't communicate with her, thinking that actually the dementia had taken over, so she could no longer communicate. And it was a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy that I stopped communicating with her, so therefore she stopped talking to me. So she probably thought, well, actually I'm not speaking properly, he's not understanding me, so there's no point. So I watched this once quite vibrant, joyful individual who used to enjoy.
How old were you, Ben, when this happened?
So I was about 2021, I think, when the first diagnosis, but she lived with it for maybe 7 to 8 years. So I watched over that, and I was at university, so that was another kind of get out that I had, that I was away from my hometown where she was living, so I could just almost ignore it, I suppose, and not try to actively engage with her and stuff. And because I found it difficult, I think, and everything I'd read about it was that dementia was this absolute death sentence. And I mean, the word dementia or demented itself means, loss of mind. And I think if you take that view, which I did without really understanding it, into interactions with her, that, oh, she hasn't got a mind anymore, what's the point, kind of thing, or she's going to die soon, I don't want to engage, then it can lead to people living with the condition to become quite isolated and to maybe internalize a lot of this kind of stigma and fear, and it will impact on their sense of self and their identity. And it was only after her death that I thought I really should kind of explore this a bit more. And that kind of links into the other reason, which my professional background. So I trained as a psychologist, and then was really interested in health psychology, but more so than what was offered from my university course. And my university course was very much around the kind of biomedical aspects, what's going on in the body that is leading to mental health conditions, cancers, dementia to some extent, although it wasn't that big then. But I was more interested in how people experience living with those conditions, how they experience recovering from those conditions now that cancer at that time was no longer this death sentence. So it's how people were experiencing recovering from that. And my first kind of primary bit of research that I did was around looking at how people with cancer and mental health return to work and some of the barriers that they faced in doing that. And a lot of what we found was people would recover from the actual physical condition or mental condition, but then return to work and come and relapse for a longer periods of sickness leave, mainly because of the anxiety and stress and depression of trying to return to work too quick, trying to get back to a level that they were once before, a lack of understanding from managers and work colleagues. Oh, you're back at work, so you must be fit and well. Here you go, here's your work back again. And there was a lot of that kind of piled up, and then people would go off again. So I was really interested in understanding how people experience these conditions and then supporting them to live better with them, rather than focusing on what's going on in the cells or the brain or the bodily aspects. So that was one area. So then, as part of my research, I was then offered the chance to work on a project around dementia, and I took that opportunity because of my personal instinct. I can use this to learn more about it. I just got really interested in the way that people learned to live or with the label of dementia. It's a very powerful label that is imposed on somebody. And it's almost immediately you introduce yourself as, I'm somebody with dementia. People have their assumptions of what this person's going to be like, what they're going to be able to do, and that will subconsciously, consciously impact on the way that you then engage them. So I was really interested in this kind of labeling effect, and the people's experiences of how their life, how they came to terms with this diagnosis, how other people came to terms with their diagnosis, and then how they tried to continue with their life.
So what are the main forms of diagnosis of dementia? I mean, it's a pretty broad term, isn't it, from what I understand?
Sure. So dementia is an umbrella term for a range of symptoms. This can include things like short-term memory loss or memory loss more generally, communication difficulties, difficulties with navigation and orientation. So it's a range of different symptoms. The underlying diseases that cause these are things, the most prominent one is Alzheimer's disease, which most people know. There's then other dementias like vascular dementia, Lewy body's dementia. So they all kind of do different things within the brain and can result in different symptoms, but they all fall under a broader banner, a broader umbrella term called dementia, yeah.
So if someone, this is one of the people we talk to who are in retirement. It's one of those 3 a.m. moments I call, one of the things that really worries them, whether their partner or is going to get it, whether their friends are going to get it, whether they're going to get it themselves. And often we can forget things. At what point do we think that we've got it or got a problem, or how do you go about even getting a diagnosis or even starting to understand whether this is just normal forgetfulness. I mean, there must be a level of normal forgetfulness. I know I forget where my keys are a lot of the time. But, how does that kind of play out?
Yeah, I think, and you're absolutely right. As we get older, well, it's interesting that as they're doing some research at the moment, there's some academics from University College London, UCL, have developed an app called Sea Hero Quest, and that is a game, really interesting, engaging game that is looking at navigation and orientation through this kind of gamification, this gaming app. And it's now being accessed by people across the age spectrum, from very young children to older people. And they've actually found from this quite huge data source that around the kind of mid to late 30s, people's orientation and navigation naturally declines anyway. So you're at your kind of peak leading up to this level, and then it will naturally decline. That doesn't mean you've got dementia. So things will start to slow down. You may have lapses in memory as you get older as well. But it's more, so one of the big tests that they use is the mini mental state exam. And this looks at your ability to retain information. And one of the first tests they do is to look at the clock, and you have to draw the time on the clock and using the hands and stuff. I mean, this might become dated with the next generation coming through, and actually only everyone uses digital clocks, but the kind of hand clock is one of the big things as well. So it's when it starts to become noticeably impacting on your life. So you may forget your keys, okay, that's fine. You didn't actually attend to that initially, you just put them somewhere. But it's when you are attending to things and then forgetting them as well. So if you're said specifically, could you remember this piece of information or these 3 pieces of information and retain that information for a minute, and you may struggle to do that. That is when you may start thinking maybe there's something else going on. I would advise, if anyone has got or is worrying about it, definitely go and see your GP and ask for a referral. I think people have been reluctant to do so in the past because there is this stigma around mental health conditions anyway. There's a lack of understanding around what dementia is, and everything that's told to people is that, if you get labelled with dementia, it's an absolute death sentence, that's it, it's a total tragedy. And one of my key messages that I like for today is it isn't a death sentence. It is very, very much possible to live well with dementia. But in order to do that, you need to get an early diagnosis so you can access the right support groups. And we need also as a community, as a society, to understand it better so we know how to interact and engage people with dementia to ensure that we can enable them to live a fulfilling life, to retain that sense of identity and to see them over and above this kind of label of dementia. The other thing is, I think GPs themselves are now getting better at diagnosing the condition. So before, as you were saying, it was just seen as, that's what happens to people as they get older. They just get a bit dotty. And GPs didn't have the training, particularly in rural areas where there's less medical professionals, less health professionals, less training or less funding to provide them with the training. But now we are getting better at diagnosing it. In Dorset, one of the reasons that the ADRC, Aging Dementia Research Centre, was set up here was because Dorset had one of the highest elderly populations and one of the lowest diagnosis rates of dementia. So one of our main tasks when we first set up was to raise awareness of dementia, to improve the training of health professionals, to support them to diagnose, and we are getting better at that around this area as well.
So there's a couple of things I want to pick up on that. There's first of all, the element of, is it possible, what are the things that if you haven't got dementia, but you're worried about it, what are the things that you can do in your lifestyle that could help maybe prevent it? And then if you have just been, maybe just follow it up afterwards, if you have just been diagnosed or you think it's going, what help can you do to prevent the onset of it, I suppose? Is there areas that you can, probably flip back to the first one, of what can we do to stop, ideally, hopefully, not even getting dementia?
Yeah, so there's about, the kind of current research is suggesting about 1/3 of cases are preventable. So there's very much a link or correlation with aging. So the older you get, the more likely you are to get it. But there are about 1/3 of lifestyle factors that you can engage in that may slow it down, prevent it. I wouldn't go as far as that, prevent it, but certainly can help. So the three big things are to remain mentally stimulated, to engage and continually kind of engage in activities. And that is actively engaged. So not just passively watching a TV or something like that, but actually going out, engaging your brain, things like crosswords, to some extent, but trying new activities as well. So actually challenging your brain, learning a second language, something like that, or can kind of help or support you because you're actively engaged in the brain. So that's a big one. Keeping physically fit as well. Exercise is really important. You've got a healthy body, you've got a healthy mind. Right. There is a connection between the body and the mind. So trying to get out and do some exercise. One of the big things about retiring is people can start to become isolated and take themselves away and maybe not do as much as they used to. That's a big thing with older men, and as men age, they don't engage as many activities as they possibly could do. And the other one is kind of socialization, to maintain friendships, develop new friendships, actually go out and speak to people. So ensure that you have this kind of social aspect to your life and you don't become isolated, because that can then lead to a kind of deteriorating physical health conditions, which can then impact on sense dementia as well. There's other things, such as if you have trouble hearing, to wear hearing aids. There's a bit of connection between, if you start to lose some of the hearing and some of the connections in there, that can then potentially increase your chances of developing dementia. And diet and healthy eating as well, like looking after kind of eating fish and making sure you've got some of fish in there. Coconut oil potentially is just people are looking at, with certainly in the ADRC, one of our professors is looking at the potential impact of introducing coconut oil into your diet as well, to see whether that has any effect as well. So there's a few things that I think definitely important, but the three big ones are mental, physical, social stimulation.
And is there a correlation between, is it inherited? I mean, if your mum got it, could you get it, kind of thing? Or is there some kind of connection there? Or
potentially, there's been some cases where people have developed it early, and when I say early, sort of in their mid-30s, late 30s, and there has been a kind of genetic link within that family. Yeah, it's still out there, I suppose, the research evidence at the moment. I think a lot of it is around kind of lifestyle issues and things like that. Right.
And then following then on to the second point of, so if you've just been to the GP and you've had your tests and you've got an early onset of dementia, what do you do? How do you face that? How do you deal with that? What can the medical profession do to help you, and what can you do yourself?
Yeah, well, I know it used to be here that GPs would go in, and particularly in some of the rural areas I worked, that some GPs were reluctant to give the dementia diagnosis because the rural areas had a very close-knit community and they understood the stigma around it, and therefore they were reluctant to give it because they knew that the stigma, the community fear of this would impact on that person's life. So sometimes it was like, just go away and almost pretend you haven't got it. It's getting better now in that having this kind of diagnosis means then you can actually access some of the support groups, certainly things that the Alzheimer's Society will provide. And what I would say is very much, once you've got this look at some of the support areas, people are now doing more within this area. It is very reliant still on volunteers and things, but these groups are beginning to set up. And once you have a dementia diagnosis, you can start to access these groups and to meet other people who are living with the condition, and just to kind of try and maintain as much as you can your kind of normal lifestyle. As I was saying, try and keep mentally stimulated, physically active, socialise, get out and about. And some of the people that I've worked with, certainly over the last 3 or 4 years, have isolated themselves very much following a diagnosis of dementia. So one of the guys that attended one of the groups that I was running had essentially socially isolated himself. He lived on the 3rd floor in a tower block. The lift had broken, so he would just sit in on his own the whole day with his wife. And I think it's probably fair to say they got a little bit bored of each other because they were there. It was their only company. Yeah. And he struggled walking sometimes. So he basically used that, I think, as a bit of an excuse not to get out. And in sitting there on his own, he internalized a lot of what he was reading around dementia. There was this horrible thing, he could no longer do things. And he himself thought that he could no longer do things. He came out to the groups Initially, he was a little bit reluctant, but he would get a taxi there, and so he kept his driving license. So a lot of people will lose their driving license, which again can lead to isolation. But he kept his driving license, but he used to get the taxi to the groups. He would come along, and we would play. I was using bits of gaming technology, things like the iPad, Nintendo Wii, and Microsoft Kinect, as a medium, really, just to bring people together. Give them a bit of physical exercise, give them something new to learn, and as a way to socialise and have a laugh over playing some of these funny games and stuff. And anyway, so he came along and he saw other people within his area who had a dementia diagnosis and the way that they were living with it. And he realised that people were living with it fine and were getting on with their lives. And some people who had the diagnosis a lot longer than he had were just carrying on with their lives. They were able to engage, and actually he found that he was much better than some of these people, and he could still engage with these new things, this new kind of learning. And I noticed so the intervention ran for 10 weeks, or I ran the intervention 10 weeks, they carried on after I left. And I noticed that he gradually started to then drive to the groups. And then after that, he would pick up one of the other guys and take him to the club. So the two of them came in together. He then started to talk to me about how he'd gone out with his wife, and he was now visiting a museum, and they would go out to a restaurant, and he would go to the cinema, and they had their date nights again. And he said, and I remember it very clearly, he was like, I know all we've done is just played these silly little games, but it's given me the confidence that I needed to go out. I've realised it's not a death sentence. You know, you could give me all the drugs you like, that's fine, but actually just getting out and seeing other people and how they're living, and that they're living with it fine, and they're getting on with their lives, gave me the confidence to come out, to go out more. And now he's re-engaged with the community and was getting out much more. So I think that kind of realization that, you know, you shouldn't be defined by this dementia level, it shouldn't impact on your life as much as it should. I think that's a really important message for people who are diagnosed with it, and for those who are supporting them, just to remember that.
Great. And I mean, that sounds like an ideal facility that you put together there, you know, with they could all meet up. Is that available? I mean, you know, is that type of thing available to people around the country?
So there's more groups beginning to set up. One of my, I suppose, my biggest issues with them is that there's a view or an assumption that if you have dementia, you probably only want to engage with these types of activities. So you get things like singing for the brain, which are bring people to dementia, bring their care partners, family members along, and they sing quite old songs. So much, the older songs than probably the people there don't even remember them. But it's this kind of like, oh, you're old, you've got dementia, you'll probably know this old song.
Right.
And I think that it's good, it's getting people out and they're engaging in the community, that's fine, I think that's really good. But it is also stereotyping what people with dementia are. Oh, they'll engage with this. And I think what's really important, if we are, so the Alzheimer's Society are trying to, their agenda is to create dementia-friendly communities. And one of the ways we're going to do that is if we start challenging these stereotypes of what people with dementia are. So people can develop dementia in their 30s or their 40s. And we need to start challenging it. So these groups are very good at providing an activity, but what they do is say, oh, this is probably what people with dementia, so you're being defined by your label, this right. Dementia label. So I'm very much interested in using other initiatives that will challenge that assumption. So using bits of gaming technology, which the whole of society is using and is engaging with, it is their way of accessing society. It's part of modern society. So things like iPads, things like the Nintendo Wii games consoles, the Microsoft Kinect games consoles. So everyone's using it. So why shouldn't people with dementia? Why should we say, well, you can't really use that because you're old and you've got dementia? Why not? So one of the big things was to actually say, well, just because you've got dementia doesn't mean you can't use the stuff that other people around society are using. So that was one way of kind of trying to challenge these assumptions.
And these game consoles allow them to play tennis and do bowling and the kind of games that they've played when they were fully active.
Exactly, yes.
They're not shooting games.
No, there was no shooting games in that. No, there was a bit of Mario Kart, a bit of driving in there. Great. We had, the tennis, the bowling. The bowling was certainly one of the most popular games. So one of the key attractions of that is that people had used to play these games, golf and things like that. but could no longer access them for various reasons. Perhaps that was because they didn't have the transport to do that. The weather was a bit crap, so they couldn't get out. And actually this was a way for them to reconnect with these activities that were once quite important to them in their life. And it enabled them to reconnect with that sense of identity that they used to have. And in doing that, though, as part of the groups, I had some older volunteers from the community who didn't have dementia diagnosis, but they supported the activities. And it was interesting to follow their kind of thought processes as they engaged over the 10 weeks. So two of them that I'm thinking of here, very much when it started were like, well, no, I don't think they're going to be able to do this. It'll be too complicated for them. They won't understand it. They've got dementia. It's going to take a lot of support. And for some people, it did. I'm not saying that everybody just engaged in it and it was perfect. People did require a bit of support, but some people didn't. And that's the beauty with some of these games, because particularly with the Nintendo Wii and Microsoft Kinect, they require the same actions that you use to play the game in real life anyway. Right. So people naturally went into the golfing pose to do it. So they engaged with it quite easily. And in witnessing people do that, it started to change the volunteers' perceptions of what people with dementia were capable of doing, what dementia actually meant for that person. And I think I noticed, certainly in one group I'm thinking of, when we started, it was very much us and them between the volunteers. I'm here just to support them, and it was like, I haven't got that. And the one guy I'm thinking of very much when he first came in was like, yeah, I'm not one of them, I think he said almost. And it was interesting to watch as over the 10-week period went, and they just started to come together, and it was then just a group of people engaging as you would with any group of people. There was this dementia label went out the window. Yeah. And I think that was certainly eye-opening for him, I would say, definitely.
And so do you think that these facilities or these kind of groups are available throughout the country, or is it just because you were doing some research? If there's a listener in Yorkshire somewhere, how's he going to access, or how would his family kind of access this kind of support?
I think the best way would be to contact the Alzheimer's Society to find out what's going on in the area. So I don't know about these specific groups. They were funded by Aged Care Dorchester, who were struggling to engage older men with dementia, and so asked if we could run these groups as part of to try and understand how we might go about accessing older men in rural areas, and they wanted us to use the gaming technology. What we are doing now, because we saw it was such a success, we are developing a platform that will provide practitioners with everything that they need to set up one of these groups. So one of the big barriers that we found was that practitioners themselves, dementia practitioners, didn't either have the knowledge around the technology or how to use it, where to buy it even, how to set it up, and then how to engage people with dementia. So they didn't have that knowledge. There was a bit of a fear within them of this technology as well. And so they weren't setting up, they weren't accessing it, and they weren't using it with people with dementia. So we're now trying to develop this online platform that will provide practitioners with everything that they possibly need to encourage them to set up and run groups with people with dementia. So at the moment, I don't know whether these groups are going on. My hope is that within the next year, when this product becomes live in July, August time, that in 2018, then it may encourage more practitioners across the UK to start engaging with these kind of
and as that comes online, we'll put on the show notes, so anyone wants to download information as it comes to July, August time, if you provide that to me, I'll put them on the show notes of the podcast, and then people will be able to access it in the future.
That'd be fantastic, definitely.
Great. That's a pretty good roundup of where we are. Just the last thing I'd like to cover off with you, Ben, is the impact on the other person in the family. Or the immediate family, the people who suddenly may be needing to care, or you've got elderly parents in a different part of the world, or the spouse. How do you view all that? What are the challenges there, and how can they have a fulfilling lives themselves, but also dealing with the care of a loved one?
Yeah, it's difficult, and I definitely cannot pretend that that's easy. A lot of the, for want of a better word, a lot of the burden can fall onto a person's partner. And that's particularly the case in my own personal example. When my gran got dementia, I ran off to university. So I wasn't there to support, so my granddad was basically the sole carer, and there wasn't at that time a huge amount of support he could access or wanted to access. Part of that is around this kind of post-war masculinity, sense of stoicism. I'm not going to give this over to someone else. I'm going to struggle through it and I'm going to do it. And I think that was probably the worst approach he could take. I think actually asking for support and trying and going to places like the Alzheimer's Society, where you can be directed to support centres for carers, for family members who are looking after someone with dementia. They exist, these kind of informal groups exist where people can just discuss issues or problems that they may be having and use and ways that they can maybe address them as well. Is a really important thing as well. And so I think I would say going to the Alzheimer's Society I think don't struggle alone would be the big message there. It can be difficult, I know that. Just from speaking to the family and the care partners that I've worked alongside, it can be difficult. And with all the will in the world, sometimes you just need that piece of respite, and the Alzheimer's Society certainly will be able to provide things like that. When I ran activities, the care partners would then use that time to go off and just have 2 hours just to collect their thoughts and things like that. I would say with things like the advancement in technology and the fact that we're beginning to challenge assumptions that people with dementia can't engage with technology, and as this kind of medium develops, it will give care partners the opportunity to incorporate it within their lives to support them in dealing with it. So I'm thinking of things like medication dispensers or tracking devices that perhaps will give them a sense of security that actually if the person I'm supporting leaves the house and decides to go into their community, I can still perhaps follow them and know where they're going, and just in case they get lost. That obviously comes with its own ethical issues, but it does offer a way for the person with dementia to be potentially slightly more independent and not as reliant on their care partner, which then can ease some of the kind of stresses that they may face as well. So that's certainly an avenue that will be growing within the next 10 to 15 years, definitely.
And where are we at with drugs? You know, is there a drugs coming online to help dementia, or you know, what's your view on that?
Not at the moment. So I recently attended an Alzheimer's Research UK Southwest meeting, where Southampton University are doing a lot of work around the drugs and developing drugs. And no, is the summary of that, they don't know. So in Alzheimer's disease, they've managed to remove the plaques and can remove the plaques, but this that can form around the brain, which they thought was the reason for the cognitive decline. And actually what they found was that people's cognitive deterioration still continued as it was before. So at the moment, no. This is pretty much unprecedented, though, within the drug world, that the big major drug companies have come together for the first time to share their research knowledge, because they just don't know what's going on and they don't know where they're going with this at the moment. So that's never happened before with any other condition. So the drug companies are now more open to sharing their research, sharing the knowledge that they have in an attempt to develop a cure. So at the moment, I don't think it's still in development, and they're quite a long way off. So I think for me personally, one of the big things is to provide the right support for those living with it, because it might be that in the next 10, 15, 20 years, a cure is found. I'm not particularly hopeful, I don't think. But we've got to remember the people living with a condition now, and that we need to support them, and we need to enable them to live a productive lifestyle despite dementia, and to maintain their sense of human rights. Just because you've got dementia doesn't mean you shouldn't maintain the rights that you were born with. So we need to find ways or ways to support them and to enact their rights.
How big is the problem?
So currently in the UK, I think there's around 850,000 people living with it. And I think that's going to go over the million mark within, I think it was somewhere around 2025. I need to check that off the top of my head. But yeah, it's pretty big and it's global. So it's now within the developing countries, people are living longer, have better healthcare within developing countries. So they're having more kind of higher incidence rates of dementia as well. And as we learn to detect it better, then the kind of incident rates of dementia increase.
So it's not as though this is a new thing, it's just that we're getting better at detecting it, and of course by living longer, we're therefore suffering problems that we wouldn't have suffered because we died earlier.
Exactly, right. And links to some lifestyle, as I talked about earlier, there's lifestyle issues as well, yeah. And there is potentially some link with type 2 diabetes, so perhaps if you develop this through poor lifestyle, then that can potentially later lead on to dementia.
So I think the message is, though, what I'm hearing is that you can make positive influences by your diet, by your exercise. Even if you get it, you can live quite a fulfilling life with the right help and support. And the right help and support is now becoming much more available.
Absolutely,
because of the awareness of what's going on.
The dementia field at the moment is where the cancer field was 20 years ago. I think there used to be, the big C. People didn't talk about it. It was feared. There was a stigma. There was a lack of understanding around it. That's where dementia is now, the big D. People didn't want to talk about it. It was the same fear, the same stigma, same lack of understanding around it. Now it's starting to get better, and it will get to where cancer is now, and people can openly talk about it, and that is, I think, the way that the dementia field is going to go over the next 10 to 15 years, definitely.
Right. And the future for you and your research and your research
future
department?
For me, well, I think the one key message that I want to get over here is that dementia isn't a death sentence. People can live positively with the condition, as you said, if they're supported well. And my big thing is to try and promote positive living with dementia, trying to support people to enact their human rights, to have the right to lifelong learning, to access activities that are meaningful to them, to provide them with social stimulation, to meet new groups, engage in new groups. Just because you've got dementia doesn't mean that life should stop and that's it. You should just sit in your house and wait to die. Get out, get into the community. Meet new people, do new activities, this thing. So my thing is around doing that, and to do that in a way, or to use activities, to use bits of technology to challenge public assumptions of dementia and what people with dementia can do. And I think only in that way can we start to develop dementia-friendly communities, which is currently on the kind of political agenda and the Alzheimer's Society agenda, So that's where I'm going at the moment,
Thank you. And where can people find out a bit more about you and the department and what you do here at Bournemouth?
Sure. Probably the best way is through Googling the Aging Dementia Research Centre, ADRC, and there's a list of projects that we're doing there. I'm also available on email at bhicks, Hicks, at bournemouth.ac.uk. If you've got any questions, just give me an email and I will respond.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time.
No problem.
It's been really interesting.
That's great. Cheers. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Cheers, Justin.
So a big thank you to Dr. Ben Hicks for joining me on this episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast. What a fascinating insight into dementia from a completely different perspective. It's so refreshing to learn about the positive steps being taken by the likes of Ben and the Aging and Dementia Research Centre to help banish the stigma around dementia and help people live positively with the disease. You can find the show notes for this episode along with some useful links at theretirementcafe.co.uk/episode 4. Let me know what you think about the points we discussed in this episode. You can also search online for the Aging and Dementia Research Centre, as it has a particular long web address, or contact Ben directly to find out more. You can email him at bhicks@bournemouth.ac.uk. You can drop me a line at jk@mfpwealthmanagement.co.uk, and you can connect with me on Twitter at JustinKingCFP. If you like this show and you'd like to leave a review on your favourite podcast player, that would be fantastic. But until next time, this is Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.
Thank you for listening to the Retirement Cafe podcast with Justin King. To find out more, you can find us online at theretirementcafe.co.uk.